Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carried the heavy tray of dishes back to the kitchen. Her feet hurt from standing all day, but she could not complain. This job at Romano's restaurant was the best she could find, and she needed every dollar she earned. The restaurant was fancy with white tablecloths and expensive wine. Rich people came here to eat and talk business. Sarah had worked here for 2 years and she knew how to stay quiet and invisible. That was what the manager wanted. The customers did not like to notice the waitress too much. As Sarah cleaned table 12, she heard the manager talking to the other waitresses. "We have a very important guest coming tonight," he said. His voice was nervous. "Marcus Hawthorne is bringing some business partners. Everything must be perfect." Sarah knew that name. Everyone in the city knew Marcus Hawthorne. He was one of the richest men in America. He made his money with computers and technology. People said he was very smart, but also very cold. He did not care about other people's feelings. At 7 o'clock, Marcus Hawthorne walked into the restaurant. Sarah recognized him from the newspapers and television. He was tall and wore an expensive black suit. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his blue eyes looked around the room like he owned everything in it. 3 other men walked with him. They all wore expensive clothes and talked loudly about money and business deals. The manager rushed to meet them and showed them to the best table in the restaurant. It was next to the grand piano in the corner. Sarah had always loved that piano. It was beautiful and black with keys that shone under the restaurant lights. Sometimes, when the restaurant was empty, she would touch the keys very softly. She had not played a real piano in years, but she still remembered how it felt. The piano player who usually worked at the restaurant was supposed to come at 8 o'clock. His name was Mr. Peterson, and he played soft music while people ate dinner. But at 8:15 the phone rang. Sarah heard the manager talking, and his voice got louder and more upset. "What do you mean you are sick?" the manager said into the phone. "Mr. Hawthorne is here, we need music." He listened for a moment, then hung up the phone. His face was red with anger and worry. Sarah brought water and bread to Marcus Hawthorne's table. She tried to move quietly, but one of the men was talking, very loudly about a business deal. "This merger will make us millions," he said, waving his hands around. Marcus Hawthorne looked bored. He checked his expensive watch and looked around the restaurant. "Where is the piano music?" he asked the manager when he walked by. "I am very sorry, Mr. Hawthorne," the manager said. "Our piano player is sick tonight, but the food will be excellent, I promise you." Marcus frowned. "This is supposed to be a classy place. How can you have a grand piano and no music? My guests expect entertainment with their dinner." Sarah was standing nearby, holding an empty tray. Without thinking, she looked at the beautiful piano. She had spent so many years dreaming of playing again. For just a moment, she imagined sitting at that bench and letting her fingers dance across the keys. Marcus Hawthorne noticed her looking at the piano, his sharp blue eyes fixed on her face. "You," he said, pointing at Sarah. "Do you play piano?" Sarah felt her face turn red. All the men at the table were looking at her now. I used to play, sir," she said quietly. "But I am just a waitress." "Perfect," Marcus said with a cold smile. "Problem solved. You can play for us tonight." Sarah shook her head quickly. "Oh no, sir, I cannot do that. I have not played in years. I am working. I have tables to serve." Marcus's smile disappeared. "I did not ask if you wanted to play. I told you to play. We are spending thousands of dollars here tonight, and we expect proper service." The manager rushed over when he heard Marcus's voice getting louder. "Is there a problem, Mr. Hawthorne?" "Your waitress can play piano," Marcus said. "She will provide the music we are paying for." "But sir," Sarah said, her voice shaking, "I really cannot. I do not know the right songs. I might make mistakes." Marcus stood up from his chair. He was much taller than Sarah, and his presence made her feel very small. "Let me explain something to you," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "I own 3 restaurants in this city. One phone call from me can make sure you never work in any good restaurant again. Now, are you going to play piano, or are you going to look for a new job tomorrow?" Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes, but she tried not to let them fall. She looked at the manager, hoping he would help her. but the manager just nodded at her and pointed toward the piano. "Please, Miss Martinez," the manager said. "Just play some soft background music. Nothing too difficult." Sarah's hands were shaking as she walked to the piano. She had dreamed of playing again for so long, but not like this. Not because a rich man was forcing her to do it. Not when she was scared and embarrassed. She sat down on the piano bench and lifted the cover from the keys. They were clean and white, beautiful under the soft lights. She touched one key very gently, and the sound filled the quiet restaurant. Marcus sat back down and continued talking to his business partners. "Now we can have a civilized dinner," he said, as if Sarah was just a piece of furniture that he had moved into place. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to remember an easy song. Her fingers found the keys for Elise, a piece she had learned when she was young. The music started soft and gentle, flowing through the restaurant like water as she played. Sarah tried to forget about Marcus Hawthorne and his cruel words. She tried to forget that she was being forced to do this. Instead, she thought about her father, who had taught her to love music. She thought about the dreams she used to have, when she believed that music could take her anywhere. But even as the beautiful music filled the room, Sarah felt a deep sadness in her heart. This was not how she had imagined playing piano again. This was not the comeback she had dreamed about. This was just another way that rich people could use poor people for their entertainment. Marcus Hawthorne did not even look at her while she played. To him, she was just background noise, no more important than the air conditioning or the soft lighting. He had no idea that the woman playing his background music had once been called a genius. He had no idea that she had sacrificed everything for her family and lost her dreams in the process. Sarah played for 30 minutes, her fingers moving automatically across the keys. When she finished the song, there was no applause, no recognition. Marcus and his partners just continued talking about their business deals, as if nothing had happened. As Sarah walked back to her other tables, she felt something break inside her heart. But she also felt something else, a tiny spark of the old fire that used to burn in her when she played music. It had been sleeping for years, but tonight, even under these terrible circumstances, it had woken up again. The next morning, Sarah woke up with her hands still aching from playing piano. She had not used those muscles in years, and they were sore and stiff. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the anger and shame she felt inside. She got dressed for work and looked at herself in the small mirror in her tiny apartment. Her eyes were red from not sleeping well. All night she had thought about Marcus Hawthorne and the way he had treated her like she was nothing. She had thought about the piano and how it felt to play again, even under such horrible circumstances. Sarah lived in a small apartment on the poor side of town. The walls were thin, and she could hear her neighbors arguing next door. The paint was old and peeling, and the heater did not work very well. But it was all she could afford with her waitress salary. On her kitchen table was a pile of bills that needed to be paid: the electric bill, the rent, and worst of all, the medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment. Her mother lived in a different city now, staying with Sarah's aunt, but Sarah still sent money every month to help pay for her medicine. Sarah counted the money in her wallet. After paying rent next week, she would have almost nothing left. She needed this job at Romano's restaurant. She could not afford to make Marcus Hawthorne angry. When Sarah arrived at work that afternoon, the manager called her into his office. His name was Mr. Romano, and he was usually kind to Sarah, but today his face looked worried and stressed. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind her. "Last night was very important for our restaurant." Mr. Hawthorne was impressed with the service. Sarah felt confused. "I thought he was angry about the music situation." Mr. Romano shook his head. "Actually, he called me this morning. He wants you to play piano again tonight. He is bringing different business partners, and he specifically requested that you provide the music." Sarah's heart sank. "Mr. Romano, I told you last night I am not a piano player anymore. I am a waitress. I do not know enough songs for a whole evening." "Sarah, you must understand," Mr. Romano said, his voice getting serious. "Mr. Hawthorne is one of our most important customers. He spends more money in one night than most customers spend in a month. If we make him happy, he will tell his rich friends to come here too. But I cannot do it, Sarah said, her voice getting louder. It is not fair to ask me to do 2 jobs at once. I cannot serve tables and play piano at the same time. Mr. Romano looked uncomfortable. Mr. Hawthorne said he would pay extra for the music. He will give the restaurant $500 and you can keep $100 of it. Sarah was quiet for a moment. $100 would help a lot with her mother's medical bills, but she still felt angry about being forced to do something she did not want to do. What if I say no? She asked. Mr. Romano's face became very serious. Sarah, you are a good waitress, and I like you. But Mr. Hawthorne is a very powerful man. He told me that if we cannot provide the service he wants, he will never come back, and he will tell other rich people not to come here either. Sarah understood what he was really saying. If she refused to play piano, she would lose her job. Mr. Romano could not afford to lose Marcus Hawthorne as a customer. I will try, Sarah said quietly. But I need to practice. I do not remember enough songs. Mr. Romano looked relieved. You can come in early and practice on the restaurant piano. Come at 4 o'clock before we open for dinner. That afternoon, Sarah sat alone in the empty restaurant, practicing simple songs on the grand piano. Her fingers felt stiff and uncertain. She had been so good at this once, but now she felt like a beginner again. She tried to remember the classical pieces she had learned in school, but many of them were too difficult. Instead, she practiced simple songs that everyone would know. Moon River, The Way You Look Tonight, and some gentle classical pieces that would not distract people from their dinner conversation. At 7 o'clock, Marcus Hawthorne arrived, with 3 different business partners. This time, Sarah was ready for him. She had put on her best black dress and tied her hair back neatly. She wanted to look professional, even though she felt nervous and scared. Marcus noticed her immediately when he walked in. There's our piano player, he said to his companions. She's just a waitress, but she plays well enough for background music. Sarah felt her face turn red with embarrassment. The way he talked about her like she was not even a real person made her feel small and angry. Actually, one of Marcus's partners said, I love piano music with dinner. It makes the whole experience more sophisticated. Marcus smiled coldly at Sarah. Well then, you better not disappoint us tonight. We have important business to discuss, and we need the right atmosphere. Sarah walked to the piano with her head held high, even though her heart was beating fast. She began with a soft, gentle piece that would not interrupt their conversation. As she played, she tried to listen to what the men were talking about. They were discussing buying a smaller company and firing most of the workers to save money. They talked about these people's jobs like they were just numbers on a piece of paper. Sarah thought about her own job and how easily Marcus could take it away from her with just one phone call. After an hour of playing, Sarah's hands were getting tired. She had not played piano for this long in years, but every time she tried to take a break, Marcus would look at her with those cold blue eyes and she would start playing again. During one of the brief moments when the men were quiet, one of them actually listened to Sarah's playing. She's quite good, he said to Marcus. Where did you find her? Marcus shrugged. She's just the waitress. I told her to play, and she plays. It's that simple. Sarah felt a flash of anger so strong that she almost stopped playing. She wanted to stand up and tell these rich men exactly what she thought of them. She wanted to tell them that she had once been good enough to study at the finest music school in the country. She wanted to tell them that she had given up her dreams to take care of her family. But she needed this job. She needed the extra money Marcus was paying her. So she kept playing, her fingers moving across the keys while her heart filled with rage and shame. As the evening went on, Sarah noticed that Marcus was watching her more carefully. Sometimes when she played a particularly difficult passage, she saw him tilt his head and really listen. But whenever she caught him looking at her, he would quickly look away and return to his business conversation. When the dinner was finally over, Marcus and his partners got up to leave. As they walked past the piano, Marcus stopped and looked down at Sarah. Same time tomorrow night, he said. It was not a request, it was an order. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as the 4 men walked out of the restaurant, talking and laughing loudly. They had no idea how their casual cruelty was affecting her life. After they left, Mr. Romano brought Sarah an envelope with her extra payment. "You did very well," he said kindly. "I know this is not easy for you." Sarah took the money, but it felt dirty in her hands. She had earned it by letting a rich man treat her like she was nothing. She had earned it by giving up her dignity and pride. As Sarah walked home that night, she thought about her father. He had always told her that music was the most beautiful thing in the world. He had taught her that playing piano was about sharing joy and beauty with other people. But what she was doing now was not beautiful. It was not about sharing joy. It was about being used by people who had more power than she did. And the worst part was she could feel herself getting trapped. The money was too good to refuse, but every night she played for Marcus Hawthorne, a little piece of her soul died. Sarah did not know it yet, but Marcus Hawthorne was also thinking about her as he drove home in his expensive car. Something about her playing had caught his attention, though he was too proud to admit it. There was something deeper in her music than he expected from a simple waitress. But Marcus was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, and he had decided that he wanted Sarah to play piano for him. He did not care about her feelings or her dreams. To him, she was just another service that he could buy with his money. The battle between them was just beginning. For 2 weeks, Marcus Hawthorne came to Romano's restaurant every Tuesday and Thursday night. Each time he brought different business partners, and each time he expected Sarah to play piano for the entire evening. Sarah was getting better at it. Her fingers were becoming stronger, and she was remembering songs she had not played in years. But she still felt angry and trapped every time she saw Marcus walk through the restaurant door. On the third Thursday night, something different happened. Marcus arrived alone. Sarah was surprised when she saw him sitting by himself at the table next to the piano. Usually he came with other business people and talked loudly about money and deals. Tonight, he just sat quietly, reading something on his phone and eating his dinner. Sarah began playing as usual, starting with soft background music that would not disturb other customers. But without the noise of business conversation, her piano playing seemed much louder in the quiet restaurant. After she finished a gentle piece by Chopin, Marcus looked up from his phone. "Do you know any Rachmaninoff?" he asked. Sarah was surprised that he knew classical music. "A little," she said carefully. "But Rachmaninoff is very difficult. I would need to practice." Marcus studied her face for a moment. "Try the second movement of Piano Concerto No. 2, the slow part." Sarah knew that piece well. It was one of the most beautiful piano pieces ever written, but also one of the most emotional and difficult. She had learned it years ago when she was a student, but she had not played it in a long time. She began very slowly, her fingers finding the familiar melody. The music was sad and beautiful, like a person crying and singing at the same time. As she played, Sarah forgot about Marcus Hawthorne and the restaurant. She forgot about being forced to play. She was lost in the music, remembering why she had loved piano so much. When she finished, Sarah looked up to see Marcus staring at her with a strange expression on his face. For the first time since she had met him, he did not look cold and cruel. He looked surprised. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. Sarah felt nervous. She did not want to talk about her past with this man who had been so mean to her. "I learned when I was young," she said simply. "That's not an answer," Marcus said. "You don't play like someone who just took lessons as a child. You have real training, professional training." Sarah continued playing, hoping he would stop asking questions. But Marcus was not the kind of man who gave up easily. "Stop playing for a minute," he said. "I want to talk to you." Sarah's hand stopped moving on the keys. She looked around the restaurant, worried that other customers would complain about the silence. "Don't worry about them," Marcus said, noticing her concern. "I want to know about your musical background. You're clearly hiding something." Sarah took a deep breath. "I studied music in college," she said, "but I had to stop." "Where did you study?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She did not want to tell him, but she could see that he would not let her avoid the question. "Juilliard?" she said very quietly. Marcus's eyebrows went up. Juilliard? The most famous music school in America? And you're working as a waitress? Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes. I had to leave school. My family needed me. Why? That's personal, Sarah said, her voice getting stronger. You would not understand. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Try me. Sarah looked at this rich, powerful man who had been treating her like a servant for weeks. She thought about all the money he spent on one dinner, money that could pay her rent for 3 months. She thought about how he had threatened her job just to get entertainment. My father died in a car accident during my 2nd year at school, she said, her voice shaking. My mother got cancer 6 months later. Someone had to take care of her and pay the medical bills. The insurance company found ways to deny most of the claims. Marcus was quiet, listening. I had to drop out of school and get a job, Sarah continued. I sent every dollar I could to help with my mother's treatment. There was no money for music lessons or practice time. I had to give up my dreams so my mother could live. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. So yes, I went to Juilliard. I was going to be a concert pianist. I had agents interested in me and everything. But real life got in the way. Rich people like you don't understand what it's like when you have to choose between your dreams and your family's survival. Marcus was silent for a long time. Sarah expected him to make some cruel comment or tell her that her sob story did not interest him. Instead, he surprised her. Play something else, he said quietly. Play something you wrote. Sarah stared at him. I don't write music. Yes, you do, Marcus said. I can tell by the way you play. You don't just play the notes on the page. You add something of yourself to every piece. That only comes from composers. Sarah felt her heart beating faster. It was true. She had written music when she was a student, but no one had heard her compositions in years. I don't remember them well enough, she said. Try. Sarah looked around the restaurant again. Most of the other customers were finishing their dinners and getting ready to leave. Mr. Romano was busy, in the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could play something just for herself. She began playing a piece she had written for her father's birthday, just a few months before he died. It was gentle and hopeful, full of love and dreams. As she played, she remembered sitting in her father's living room, playing this song while he smiled and told her how proud he was. The music filled the restaurant with a warmth and beauty that was completely different from the background music she had been playing for Marcus's business dinners. This was real music, music that came from her heart. When she finished, Sarah realized that the entire restaurant had gone quiet. All the remaining customers had stopped talking and were looking at her. Even the kitchen staff had come out to listen. Marcus was staring at her with an expression she could not read. What was that piece called? He asked. Dreams of Tomorrow, Sarah said softly. I wrote it for my father. Marcus nodded slowly. You're wasting your talent working as a waitress. Sarah felt angry again. I don't have a choice. This is the life I have now. There are always choices, Marcus said. You just have to be willing to take risks. Easy for you to say, Sarah replied. You've never had to worry about paying rent or buying food. You don't know what it's like to be poor. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. You're right, he said finally. I don't know what that's like. I was born rich and I've never had to struggle for anything. Sarah was surprised by his honesty. It was the first time he had admitted that his life was different from hers. But I do know talent when I see it, Marcus continued. And you have more talent than most of the professional musicians I've heard. It seems like a waste. Sarah did not know what to say. Part of her felt pleased that he recognized her ability, but part of her was still angry about the way he had treated her. I should get back to playing, she said. Other customers might complain. Marcus nodded, but Sarah could see that he was thinking about something. As she began playing again, she noticed that he was watching her hands move on the keys, not in the bored, dismissive way he had watched before, but with real attention and interest. For the rest of the evening, Marcus did not talk on his phone or read his emails. He just sat quietly, listening to Sarah play. Sometimes he would request specific pieces, and Sarah was surprised by how much he knew about classical music. When the restaurant was closing, Marcus stood up to leave. He walked over to the piano, where Sarah was closing the lid over the keys. "Same time next week?" he asked. Sarah nodded, expecting him to walk away. Instead, he reached into his wallet and pulled out $200 bills. "This is for tonight," he said, placing the money on the piano. "For the real music, not just the background noise." Sarah looked at the money, then back at Marcus. "Why?" "Because you're not just a waitress," Marcus said. "And it's time someone acknowledged that." As he walked away, Sarah felt confused and conflicted. Marcus Hawthorne was still the man who had threatened her job and forced her to play piano. But tonight, for the first time, he had treated her like a real musician instead of just a servant. Sarah did not know it yet, but this conversation had changed something in Marcus too. He had spent his whole life getting whatever he wanted through money and power. But tonight, he had heard something in Sarah's music that money could not buy: pure, honest talent and emotion. For the first time in years, Marcus Hawthorne was interested in something that was not about business or profit. He was interested in Sarah Martinez, the waitress who could play piano like an angel and had given up her dreams to save her family. The next Tuesday, Marcus came to the restaurant earlier than usual. Instead of his normal business dinner, he arrived at 6 o'clock and asked to speak with Sarah privately. Sarah was nervous as she followed him to a quiet corner table. Over the past week, she had thought about their conversation many times. She was still angry about how he had treated her, but she was also curious about why he seemed different now. "I have a business proposition for you," Marcus said as soon as they sat down. Sarah felt her heart sink. "I already told you I'm not interested in any kind of arrangement outside of work." Marcus held up his hand. "It's not what you think. This is about music." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "I'm organizing a charity gala next month. 500 of the wealthiest people in the city will be there. We need a pianist for the evening." Sarah looked at the folder but did not touch it. "You can hire any professional musician you want. Why are you asking me?" "Because after hearing you play last week, I realized that most professional musicians are boring," Marcus said. "They play perfectly, but there's no soul in it. You have something different." Sarah shook her head. "I can't perform at a gala. I don't have experience with that kind of event. I would embarrass myself." Marcus leaned forward. The pay would be $20,000 for one evening. Sarah's mouth fell open. $20,000 was more than she made in an entire year at the restaurant. It would pay off her mother's medical bills and give her enough money to maybe go back to school. "There has to be a catch," she said suspiciously. Marcus smiled, but it was not a warm smile. "The catch is that you have to prove you're good enough. I'm not going to risk my reputation on a waitress who might fail in front of important people." "What do you mean?" Marcus opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of music. "These are the pieces I want you to play at the gala. You have exactly 2 weeks to learn them perfectly. At the end of 2 weeks, you'll audition for me. If you pass, you get the job. If you fail, you go back to being a waitress, and we never speak about this again." Sarah looked at the music sheets. Even from a quick glance, she could see that these were very difficult pieces. There were works by Liszt, Chopin, and Rachmaninoff that would challenge even professional concert pianists. "This is impossible," she said. "I can't learn all of this in 2 weeks while working full-time. Then you'll have to make some choices about what's really important to you," Marcus replied coldly. Sarah felt the familiar anger rising in her chest. "You're doing it again. You're trying to force me to do something by threatening to take away what little I have." "I'm offering you an opportunity," Marcus said. "A real chance to use your talent for something bigger than background music in a restaurant. But opportunities come with risks." Sarah stared at the music sheets. Some of these pieces were ones she had dreamed of performing when she was a student. They were beautiful, challenging works that would let her show everything she was capable of. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. "What do you get out of it?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. I'm tired of hiring musicians who play like robots. I want someone who can make people feel something when they hear the music. You did that for me last week. And if I can't learn all of this in time? Then you prove that you're just a waitress after all, Marcus said with a shrug. And I find someone else. The cruel way he said it made Sarah's face burn with anger. You really think you can buy and control everyone, don't you? I think that most people want something badly enough that they're willing to work for it, Marcus replied. The question is, how badly do you want to be a real musician again? Sarah looked at the music one more time. Her hands were already moving slightly as if they were trying to play the notes she was reading. Despite her anger at Marcus, she could feel the excitement building inside her. These were the kinds of pieces she had always dreamed of mastering. I'll need somewhere to practice, she said finally. I can't learn this on the restaurant piano with customers around. Marcus reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a key. There's a practice room in my office building, 24th floor. You can use it whenever you want. Sarah took the key, surprised by how heavy it felt in her hand. And my job at the restaurant? Talk to Romano. I'll make sure he gives you the time off you need. Sarah realized that Marcus had already planned all of this before he even talked to her. He had known she would say yes because he was offering her something she could not refuse. This feels like another trap, she said. Marcus stood up from the table. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's the chance you've been waiting for your whole life. You won't know unless you try. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She kept thinking about the music Marcus had given her and the $20,000 he had offered. The money would change her life completely. She could pay off all her debts, help her mother, and maybe even save enough to go back to school. But she was also scared. It had been years since she had performed for anyone besides restaurant customers. What if she had forgotten how to really play? What if all those years of struggling and working had damaged her ability? The next morning, Sarah went to Marcus's office building. The practice room was on the 24th floor, just as he had said. When she opened the door with the key he had given her, she gasped. The room was beautiful. It had large windows that looked out over the city, and in the center was the most gorgeous grand piano she had ever seen. It was a Steinway, the kind of instrument that professional concert pianists dreamed of playing. Sarah sat down at the piano bench and lifted the lid. The keys were perfect, gleaming white and black in the morning sunlight. She pressed one key, gently, and the sound that came out was rich and pure. For a moment, she just sat there, overwhelmed by the beauty of the instrument and the room. Then she pulled out the first piece of music Marcus had given her, a Chopin ballade that she had learned in school but had not played in years. As her fingers began moving across the keys, Sarah felt something wake up inside her. This was why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Not the background playing at the restaurant, not the pressure and fear, but this, the pure joy of making something beautiful. For 3 hours, Sarah worked on the Chopin piece. Her fingers were rusty and she made many mistakes, but slowly the music began to come back to her. It was like remembering a language she had not spoken in years. When she finally stopped playing, Sarah realized that she was crying. She had forgotten how much she missed this feeling. The complete focus, the challenge, the satisfaction of mastering something difficult and beautiful. Over the next week, Sarah spent every free moment in the practice room. She would go there early in the morning before work, during her breaks, and late at night after the restaurant closed. Her fingers began to get stronger, and her memory for the music came back faster than she had expected. But the pieces Marcus had chosen were extremely difficult. The listitude was so fast and complex that Sarah's hands cramped from practicing it. The Rachmaninoff piece required her to stretch her fingers in ways that were painful after years of not playing seriously. Sometimes, when she was struggling with a particularly hard passage, Sarah would get angry at Marcus again. She knew he had chosen these pieces partly to see if she would fail. He was testing her, pushing her to see how far she could go. But despite her anger, Sarah found herself becoming excited about the challenge. Each day she could feel herself getting better. The music was coming back to her, and with it, the confidence she had lost years ago. On Friday of the first week, Marcus came to the practice room while Sarah was there. She had not expected to see him, and she felt nervous playing in front of him again. "How is it going?" he asked, sitting in a chair near the piano. "It's hard," Sarah admitted. "Some of these pieces are at the edge of what I can do." "Good," Marcus said. "If it was easy, it wouldn't be worth doing." Sarah continued playing the Rachmaninoff piece she had been working on. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Your technique is coming back quickly," he said finally. "But you're still holding back." "What do you mean?" "You're playing the notes correctly, but you're not taking any risks. You're playing it safe because you're afraid of making mistakes." Sarah felt defensive. "These pieces are very difficult. I'm trying not to mess them up." Marcus stood up and walked over to the piano. "At the gala, no one will care if you hit a few wrong notes, but they will care if your playing is boring and safe." He looked directly at her. "You have 1 week left. Stop trying to play it perfectly and start trying to play it beautifully." After Marcus left, Sarah sat alone at the piano thinking about what he had said. She realized that he was right. She had been so focused on not making mistakes that she had forgotten about making music. That night, Sarah made a decision. She was going to stop playing it safe. She was going to take risks, even if it meant failing. Because deep down, she knew that Marcus was offering her more than just money. He was offering her a chance to be the musician she had always dreamed of being. The question was, would 2 weeks be enough time to remember who she used to be? The second week was harder than Sarah had expected. She was now practicing 6 hours a day, splitting her time between the beautiful practice room and her shifts at the restaurant. Her fingers were getting stronger, but her body was exhausted from the constant work. Mr. Romano had been kind about giving her shorter shifts, but Sarah still needed to work enough hours to pay her bills. She would wake up at 5 in the morning to practice for 2 hours before work, then rush to the restaurant for the lunch shift, then back to practice in the afternoon, then the dinner shift, then more practice until late at night. By Wednesday of the second week, Sarah's hands were covered in small cuts from the piano strings, and her back ached from hunching over the keys for so many hours. But the music was getting better. She could feel her old skills returning, like muscles that had been sleeping for years and were finally waking up. The Chopin ballade was now flowing smoothly under her fingers. The Liszt etude, which had seemed impossible at first, was becoming manageable. But the Rachmaninoff piece was still giving her trouble. It required not just technical skill, but deep emotional expression, and Sarah was struggling to find that connection. On Thursday, Marcus came to hear her practice again. Sarah was nervous about playing for him, especially the Rachmaninoff piece that was still not ready. "Let me hear everything from the beginning," Marcus said, settling into the chair near the piano. Sarah started with the Chopin. Her fingers moved confidently across the keys, and the music filled the room with its gentle, romantic melody. When she finished, she saw Marcus nod approvingly. The Liszt etude was next. This piece was like a musical storm, fast, powerful, and technically challenging. Sarah's hands flew across the keyboard, and she could feel the excitement of the music building inside her. When the final notes rang out, she was breathing hard, but smiling. "Much better," Marcus said. "You're starting to take risks." Then came the Rachmaninoff. Sarah began the piece, but she could tell that something was wrong. The notes were correct and her technique was good, but the music felt empty. It was missing the deep emotion that made this piece so special. Halfway through, Marcus held up his hand. "Stop." Sarah's hands froze on the keys. "What's wrong?" Marcus stood up and walked to the window. "This piece is about loss," he said, looking out at the city. "It's about loving something so much that losing it breaks your heart. You're playing it like a technical exercise." Sarah felt frustrated. "I'm trying to play it with feeling, but this piece is so difficult that I have to focus on the notes." Marcus turned back to her. "Tell me about your father." The question surprised Sarah. "What does that have to do with anything?" Rachmaninoff wrote this piece after he lost someone he loved, Marcus said. You told me you wrote music for your father. What was he like? Sarah felt uncomfortable talking about something so personal with Marcus, but she could see that he was serious about helping her understand the music. He was a construction worker, she said quietly. He worked very hard to support our family, but every evening after work he would come home and ask me to play piano, for him. He said my music was the most beautiful thing in his life. How did he die? Sarah's voice became even quieter. A drunk driver hit his car on his way home from work. He died instantly. Marcus was silent for a moment. Play the piece again, but this time don't play it for me or for the audience at the gala. Play it for your father. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes and placed her hands back on the keys. This time, as she began the Rachmaninoff piece, she thought about her father. She remembered his smile when she played for him and his pride in her talent. She remembered the last time she played for him, just a week before he died. The music that came from the piano was completely different from before. It was full of love and sadness, hope and despair. Sarah was no longer thinking about the technical difficulties of the piece. She was thinking about loss and memory and the way music could keep someone alive in your heart, even after they were gone. When she finished, Sarah realized that she was crying. She looked up to see Marcus watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. That, he said softly, is how you play, Rachmaninoff. The next day was Friday, the last day before Sarah's audition. She spent the entire day in the practice room going through all 3 pieces over and over again. Her hands were sore and her mind was tired, but the music was finally ready. That evening, as Sarah was getting ready to leave the practice room, Marcus appeared in the doorway. She was surprised to see him there so late. How do you feel about tomorrow? He asked. Nervous, Sarah admitted. But also excited. I haven't felt this way about music in years. Marcus walked into the room and sat down at the piano bench next to her. Can I tell you something? Sarah nodded. When I was young, I wanted to be a musician too, Marcus said. I played violin. I was pretty good at it. Sarah was shocked. She had never imagined Marcus as anything other than a businessman. What happened? She asked. My father happened, Marcus said with a bitter laugh. He told me that music was a waste of time, that I needed to focus on business and making money. He said that only poor people became musicians and that I was born to be better than that. Sarah could hear the old pain in his voice. So I gave up violin and went to business school, Marcus continued. I became exactly what my father wanted me to be, rich and successful and completely empty inside. Is that why you're doing this? Sarah asked. Because you regret giving up music? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Maybe, he said finally. Or maybe I just want to see someone else get the chance I never took. Sarah felt her anger toward Marcus softening. She was beginning to understand that underneath his cold, cruel exterior was someone who had also lost his dreams. The people at the gala tomorrow night, Marcus said, they're all like my father. They think that money is the only thing that matters. They think that people like you, working-class people who struggle to survive, are beneath them. He looked directly at Sarah. I want you to prove them wrong. I want you to show them what real talent looks like. Sarah felt a new kind of pressure, but also a new kind of purpose. This was not just about earning $20,000 anymore. This was about proving that a waitress from the poor side of town could create something beautiful enough to silence a room full of rich people. What if I fail? Sarah asked. Then you fail, Marcus said simply. But at least you'll fail trying to do something great instead of succeeding at something small. After Marcus left, Sarah sat alone in the practice room for a long time. Tomorrow night she would either achieve her dreams or lose them forever. There was no middle ground, no safety net. She thought about her father and what he would say if he could see her now. She thought about her mother, fighting cancer in another city, and how the money from this gala could change both their lives. But mostly, she thought about the music. After years of playing background noise for people who did not care, she was finally going to have a chance to really perform again. To share the beauty and emotion that had first made her fall in love with piano. Sarah placed her hands on the keys one more time and began to play. Not for practice, not for Marcus, not for the money, but simply for the joy of making music. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight she was exactly where she belonged. As the last notes of the Rachmaninoff piece faded into silence, Sarah knew that regardless of what happened at the gala, she had already won something important. She had remembered who she really was underneath the uniform, and the bills, and the years of struggle. She was a musician, and tomorrow night, the whole world would know it. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel was the most beautiful place Sarah had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, and the walls were covered in gold leaf that sparkled in the soft light. Round tables, covered in white silk, filled the room, each one set with fine china and silver that probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. Sarah stood at the edge of the ballroom, wearing the one good black dress she owned. She had spent her last $20 getting it dry cleaned and buying new black shoes. Next to all the wealthy women in their designer gowns and expensive jewelry, Sarah felt like she was wearing a costume. "You look fine," Marcus said, appearing beside her. He was wearing a black tuxedo that fit him perfectly, and his hair was styled in a way that made him look even more handsome and powerful than usual. "I don't belong here," Sarah whispered, watching as guests in evening wear laughed and talked around expensive cocktails. "None of us really belong anywhere," Marcus replied. "We just pretend better than others." A man in a fancy uniform approached them. "Mr. Hawthorne, the piano is ready for the performance." Sarah's heart began beating faster as she followed Marcus across the ballroom. The piano was a beautiful black grand piano, sitting on a small stage at the front of the room. It was surrounded by flowers and lit by soft spotlights. 500 people, Sarah said, looking at all the filled tables. "Don't think about the people," Marcus said. "Just think about the music." Sarah sat down at the piano bench and lifted the lid. The keys were perfect. And when she pressed one gently, the sound was rich and clear. This was an excellent instrument, the kind that responded to every small change in touch and pressure. As Sarah prepared to begin, she looked out at the audience. These people were not like the customers at Romano's restaurant. These were the richest and most powerful people in the city. She saw politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and socialites. They all looked elegant and sophisticated and completely uninterested in her. Most of them were still talking and laughing, barely noticing that a performance was about to begin. A few looked in her direction, but their expressions showed they expected nothing more than pleasant background music while they continued their conversations. At a table near the front, Sarah saw Marcus sitting with several other wealthy-looking men and women. He caught her eye and gave her a small nod of encouragement. Sarah took a deep breath and began the first piece, the Chopin Ballade. Her fingers found the keys easily, and the familiar melody began to flow through the ballroom. The music was gentle and romantic, perfect for the elegant setting. But as Sarah played, she realized that most of the audience was ignoring her. They continued eating their expensive dinners and talking about their business deals and social plans. The beautiful music she was creating was just background noise to them. This made Sarah feel sad and angry. She had worked so hard to prepare for this night, and these people did not even care enough to listen. To them, she was just part of the entertainment, no more important than the flowers on their tables. As she moved into the more complex middle section of the Chopin piece, Sarah tried to play louder, hoping to get their attention. But the conversations continued. A woman at a nearby table was talking loudly about her recent vacation to Europe. A man was explaining a business deal on his phone. When the Chopin piece ended, there was scattered polite applause from a few people. Most of the audience did not even notice that one piece had ended and another was about to begin. Sarah felt her confidence starting to crack. This was not how she had imagined her return to performing. In her dreams, the audience was quiet and respectful, hanging on every note. In reality, she was being treated exactly the way Marcus had treated her at first, like invisible background music. The second piece was the Liszt Etude, fast, brilliant, and technically challenging. As Sarah began the rapid passages, a few more people looked in her direction. The sheer speed and complexity of the music was impressive, even to people who did not know much about classical music. But still, most of the audience continued their conversations. Sarah could hear fragments of their talk, discussions about stock prices, real estate deals, and expensive vacations. These people had so much money that they had forgotten how to appreciate anything that could not be bought. As Sarah played the demanding Liszt piece, she felt her hands starting to get tired. The combination of nerves and the challenging music was taking its toll. She made a few small mistakes in the fastest passages, but continued playing with determination. When the Liszt piece ended, the applause was slightly louder. A few people had actually been listening, and they appreciated the technical skill required for such a difficult piece. But Sarah could see that most of the audience was still more interested in their dinner conversation than in her performance. Now came the final piece, the Rachmaninoff that she and Marcus had worked on so intensively. This was the piece that required not just technical skill, but deep emotional connection. This was her chance to really show what she could do. But as Sarah looked out at the indifferent audience, she felt her heart sinking. What was the point of pouring her emotions into this music if no one was going to listen? What was the point of sharing her deepest feelings with people who saw her as nothing more than hired entertainment? Sarah began the Rachmaninoff piece, but she could feel that she was holding back. The pain of being ignored, the anger at being treated like a servant, the disappointment of this not being the triumphant return she had imagined, all of these feelings were making it hard for her to connect with the music. The piece sounded technically correct, but it lacked the emotional power that had moved Marcus to tears in the practice room. Sarah was playing the notes, but she was not playing from her heart. As she continued through the piece, Sarah noticed that even fewer people were paying attention now. The music was slower and more introspective than the previous pieces, and it was easier for the audience to ignore. Conversations continued, cell phones buzzed, and waiters moved around the room serving coffee and dessert. Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes. This was supposed to be her big chance, her opportunity to prove that she was a real musician. Instead, it was turning into another humiliation, another reminder that people like her did not matter to people like this. She looked over at Marcus's table and saw him watching her with a concerned expression. He could tell that something was wrong, that she was not playing with the passion and skill he had heard in the practice room. As Sarah approached the climax of the Rachmaninoff piece, the most emotional and technically demanding section, she realized that she had a choice to make. She could finish the piece safely, collect her money, and go back to being a waitress. Or she could take the risk that Marcus had been talking about, the risk of playing with her whole heart even if no one was listening. Sarah thought about her father and the way he had listened to her music with such love and attention. She thought about all the years she had given up her dreams to take care of her family. She thought about the little girl who had fallen in love with piano and believed that music could change the world. And suddenly, Sarah did not care whether the audience was listening or not. She was not playing for them anymore. She was playing for herself, for her father, for all the dreams she had lost and found again. But first, she was going to make them listen. She was going to demand their attention, not with volume or technical tricks, but with something much more powerful, the truth of her own experience. Sarah's hands lifted from the keys and the ballroom fell into an unexpected silence. For the first time all evening, everyone looked in her direction, wondering why the music had stopped. In that moment of silence, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of finishing the Rachmaninoff piece as planned, she was going to play something else. Something that came from the deepest part of her heart. Something that would make these rich, powerful people remember what it felt like to feel real emotion. She was going to play the song she had written for her. Father, She Dreams of Tomorrow. The silence in the grand ballroom stretched for several long seconds. Sarah sat at the piano with her hands resting on her lap, looking out at 500 wealthy, powerful people who had suddenly realized that something unexpected was happening. Marcus, leaned forward in his chair, his eyebrows raised in concern. This was not part of the program they had planned. Sarah was supposed to finish the Rachmaninoff piece, take her polite applause, and collect her payment. What was she doing? A few people in the audience began to whisper, wondering if something was wrong with the piano or if the performance was over. But Sarah could feel a different kind of energy in the room now. The energy of people who were actually paying attention for the first time all evening. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about her father. She remembered the last time she had played for him, just a week before the accident that took his life. He had been tired from a long day of construction work, his hands rough and stained, but his eyes had been bright with love and pride as he listened to her play. "Play something you wrote, mija," he had said that night, using the Spanish nickname that meant my daughter. "Play something that comes from your heart." She had played Dreams of Tomorrow for him that night, the piece she had composed about hope and love and the belief that music could make the world more beautiful. Her father had tears in his eyes when she finished. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," he had whispered. "Promise me you'll never stop making music like that." It was a promise Sarah had broken when life forced her to give up her dreams. But tonight, in this room full of people who had everything except the ability to feel real emotion, she was going to keep that promise at last. Sarah placed her hands back on the keys and began to play. The first notes of Dreams of Tomorrow were soft and gentle like a lullaby or a prayer. The melody was simple but hauntingly beautiful, the kind of music that reached directly into the listener's heart without passing through their brain first. As Sarah played, she forgot about the audience completely. She forgot about Marcus and his challenge, about the $20,000, about proving herself to people who looked down on her. She played for her father, pouring all of her love and grief and hope into every note. The music began to grow stronger and more complex. Sarah's left hand created a rich, flowing accompaniment, while her right hand sang the melody with a pure, clear tone that filled every corner of the ballroom. The piece told a story without words, a story about dreams deferred but not destroyed, about love that survives even death, about the power of beauty to heal broken hearts. Something magical began to happen in the audience. The conversations that had continued throughout the first three pieces gradually died away. People stopped eating their dessert and put down their coffee cups. Cell phones were silenced and placed on tables. At first, it was just a few people who were drawn in by the unusual beauty of the music. But slowly, like ripples spreading across a pond, the attention spread from table to table. People who had been laughing and talking about business deals found themselves listening with growing wonder to this unknown song, played by a woman they had assumed was just hired entertainment. The music was unlike anything they had heard before. It was not the familiar classical pieces that usually provided background for their social events. This was something new, something personal, something that spoke directly to emotions they had forgotten they possessed. An elderly woman at table 5, who had been complaining loudly about her taxes, found tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened. She did not understand why this music was affecting her so deeply, but she could not look away from the young woman at the piano. A middle-aged businessman who had been checking his stock portfolio on his phone put the device aside and stared at Sarah with amazement. The melody reminded him of something from his childhood, some long-lost innocence that he thought was gone forever. A young socialite who had been gossiping with her friends fell completely silent, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand. The music was awakening feelings she had never experienced before, a longing for something real and meaningful in her life of parties and shopping. As Sarah moved into the most emotional section of the piece, her playing became even more intense and passionate. Her whole body was involved in creating the music, swaying gently with the rhythm, her face transformed by the joy and pain of expression. The audience was now completely silent. 500 people who were used to being entertained by purchased performances found themselves witnessing something entirely different, a young woman sharing the deepest part of her soul through music. Marcus sat transfixed at his table, realizing that Sarah was giving him a glimpse of the musician she had been before life forced her into compromise. This was the talent that had earned her a place at Juilliard, the gift that she had buried under years of struggle and survival. But it was more than just technical skill. What Sarah was playing came from a place of genuine emotion that none of the hired musicians at previous galas had ever accessed. She was not performing for these people. She was sharing something sacred with them, something that money could not buy. As the piece built toward its climax, Sarah's playing became more powerful and urgent. The melody soared above a cascade of notes like a bird breaking free from a cage. The music spoke of dreams that refuse to die, of beauty that survives in the darkest places, of the human spirit's ability to create hope from despair. The entire ballroom was holding its breath. Waiters stopped clearing tables and stood frozen with dishes in their hands. Even the hotel staff who had been working in the background found themselves drawn into the spell of Sarah's music. And then, as the final notes of Dreams of Tomorrow rang out across the silent ballroom, something unprecedented happened. For several long seconds, no one moved, no one applauded, no one spoke. They were all too stunned by what they had just experienced. Sarah kept her hands on the keys for a moment after the music ended, her eyes still closed, her heart still full of the emotions she had just shared. She had played that piece exactly as she had written it, with complete honesty and vulnerability. She had held nothing back. When she finally opened her eyes and looked out at the audience, Sarah was amazed by what she saw. 500 of the most sophisticated worldly people in the city were staring at her with expressions of wonder and amazement. Many had tears in their eyes. Some looked as if they had just witnessed a miracle. And then slowly, one person began to clap. It was the elderly woman at table 5, the one who had been complaining about her taxes. She stood up as she applauded, her face wet with tears. One by one, other people joined her. The businessman put away his phone and started clapping with enthusiasm. The young socialite stood up, applauding with genuine emotion for perhaps the first time in her life. Within moments, the entire ballroom was on its feet, giving Sarah a standing ovation unlike anything she had ever imagined. The applause was thunderous, filled with real appreciation and respect. These people were not clapping politely for hired entertainment. They were celebrating an artist who had just given them a gift they would never forget. Sarah stood up from the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. She had expected polite applause, perhaps even indifference. She had not expected this outpouring of genuine emotion from people she had assumed were incapable of feeling anything real. As the applause continued, Sarah looked over at Marcus's table. He was standing and clapping with the rest, but there was something different in his expression. He looked proud but also humble. For the first time since she had known him, Marcus Hawthorne looked like he had learned something important. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. When it finally began to die down, Sarah saw people at various tables wiping their eyes and looking at her with new respect. She had done something that evening that she had never imagined possible. She had made 500 wealthy, powerful people remember what it felt like to be human. As the applause finally began to fade, Sarah stood beside the piano, still overwhelmed by what had just happened. She had never experienced anything like this. Hundreds of people giving her a genuine standing ovation, not because they felt they had to, but because they had been truly moved by her music. Before she could fully process what was happening, people began approaching the stage. But these were not just any people. Sarah could tell from their confident manner and expensive clothes that these were some of the most important guests at the gala. The first person to reach her was an elegant woman in her 50s wearing a stunning silver gown and diamonds that sparkled under the ballroom lights. "My dear," the woman said, taking Sarah's hands in hers, "that was absolutely extraordinary. I'm Victoria Chen, director of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation." Sarah's eyes widened. She knew that name. The Metropolitan Arts Foundation was one of the most prestigious arts organizations in the country. "I've been attending concerts and galas for 30 years, Victoria continued, "and I have never heard anything like what you just played. That piece, did you compose it yourself?" "Yes," Sarah said quietly, still hardly believing this was happening. "I wrote it for my father." Victoria's eyes filled with tears again. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. We must talk about having you perform at our winter concert series. Are you represented by an agent? Before Sarah could answer, another person approached, a distinguished older man with gray hair and kind eyes. Excuse me, he said politely to Victoria, then turned to Sarah. I'm Dr. James Morrison, conductor of the City Symphony Orchestra. Young lady, where did you study music? Juilliard, Sarah replied, feeling like she was in a dream. But I had to leave before I graduated. Dr. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Your technique is remarkable, but more importantly, you have something that cannot be taught. The ability to connect with your audience on a deeply emotional level. We have an opening for a guest soloist next month. Would you be interested in auditioning? Sarah felt her heart racing. The City Symphony Orchestra was one of the most respected musical organizations in the region. Playing with them had been one of her biggest dreams when she was a student. I would love to audition, she stammered. More people continued to approach. There was a music producer who worked with major recording labels, offering to discuss a possible recording contract. There was a wealthy patron of the arts who wanted to sponsor Sarah's return to formal musical education. There was even a talent agent who specialized in classical musicians. Each conversation was like a door opening to possibilities Sarah had thought were lost forever. These were not just polite compliments. These were serious professionals offering real opportunities. As Sarah spoke with each person, she kept glancing over at Marcus's table. He was still sitting there, watching everything unfold with an expression she had never seen on his face before. He looked humbled. After about an hour of conversations, exchanging business cards, and making tentative plans for auditions and meetings, the crowd around Sarah finally began to thin out. The gala was winding down and people were starting to leave. Sarah gathered her sheet music and prepared to go, but Marcus appeared beside her. We need to talk, he said quietly. They found a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the remaining guests. For a moment, neither of them spoke. That was not what we planned, Marcus said finally. Sarah felt a flash of her old defiance. I know. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you by not following your program exactly. Marcus shook his head. You didn't embarrass me, Sarah. You humbled me. Sarah looked at him in surprise. She had never heard Marcus Hawthorne admit to being wrong about anything. When I first heard you play at the restaurant, Marcus continued, I thought I had found a talented waitress who could provide good entertainment for my business dinners. I treated you like a service I could purchase. He paused, looking uncomfortable with his own words. But tonight, I realized something. You're not just a talented waitress. You're an artist, a real artist. And artists cannot be bought or controlled. They can only be respected and appreciated. Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes again. Marcus, let me finish, he said, holding up his hand. I forced you to play background music for people who didn't deserve to hear it. I threatened your job to make you do what I wanted. I treated you like you were less than me because you were poor and I was rich. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. This is your payment for tonight. $25,000, not $20,000. You earned the extra $5,000 with that final piece. Sarah took the envelope, but she was more interested in what Marcus was saying than in the money. But more than that, Marcus continued, I owe you an apology. A real apology. What I did to you was wrong. I used my power to force someone with more talent than I will ever have to perform for people who didn't appreciate what they were hearing. Sarah had never expected to hear Marcus Hawthorne apologize for anything, especially not to her. I also want to offer you something else, Marcus said. I have connections in the music world. I can help you get back into Juilliard if that's what you want. I can provide financial support while you finish your degree. No strings attached, no control over what you do or how you do it. Just help from someone who recognizes that he almost destroyed something beautiful because of his own arrogance. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing everything that had happened. 6 weeks ago, she had been just a waitress struggling to pay her bills. Tonight, she had been offered recording contracts, symphony performances, and educational opportunities that would change her life completely. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the apology and for the offer. But I need to think about what I want to do next." Marcus nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Sarah looked around the beautiful ballroom one more time. "You know what's funny? When I was playing tonight, I wasn't thinking about impressing all these wealthy people. I was thinking about my father and how he always believed that music could change people's hearts." "He was right," Marcus said softly. "You changed a lot of hearts tonight, including mine." As they prepared to leave, Sarah realized that her relationship with Marcus had fundamentally changed. He was no longer the cruel billionaire who had threatened her job. He was no longer her tormentor or her employer. He had become something she never expected, a friend who had learned to respect her talent and her dignity. But more importantly, Sarah had changed too. She was no longer the frightened waitress who let powerful people push her around. She was no longer the broken dreamer who had given up on her musical ambitions. She was a musician again, an artist who had proven that talent and passion could triumph over money and power. 3 months later, Sarah Martinez performed as a guest soloist with the City Symphony Orchestra. The concert was sold out and she received 3 standing ovations. Her recording contract resulted in an album that reached the top of the classical music charts. She was also accepted back into Juilliard with a full scholarship, funded by an anonymous donor who wanted to support artists who had overcome significant obstacles. Sarah suspected she knew who that donor was, but Marcus never confirmed it. Sarah kept her job at Romano's restaurant for 1 more month after the gala, not because she needed the money anymore, but because she wanted to finish what she had started, there with dignity. Mr. Romano threw her a farewell party, and all the staff came to wish her well. On her last night working at the restaurant, Sarah played one final song on the grand piano in the corner, "Dreams of Tomorrow." But this time, she was playing it not as background music for people who weren't listening, but as a celebration of dreams that had been lost and found again. Marcus Hawthorne was there that night, sitting quietly at a corner table, listening, with the respect and attention that Sarah's music deserved. When she finished playing, he stood up and applauded, not because he had paid for entertainment, but because he had witnessed something beautiful. As Sarah walked out of Romano's restaurant for the last time, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had learned that talent without opportunity is just potential, but she had also learned that opportunity without courage is just another missed chance. Most importantly, she had learned that her worth as a person and as an artist was not determined by how much money she had or what job she worked. Her value came from the music she could create and the emotions she could share with others. Years later, when Sarah had become a successful concert pianist and composer, she would often think back to that night at the Meridian Hotel. She would remember how it felt to silence a room full of powerful people with nothing but her music and her truth. She kept a photo from that evening on her piano at home. Not a picture of herself or the fancy ballroom, but a photo of her father that she had placed on the music stand while she practiced Dreams of Tomorrow. It reminded her that the most important audience for any artist is not the crowd that pays the most money, but the people who love and believe in you. Sarah also learned something else important that night. Marcus Hawthorne had started as her oppressor, using his power to force her into situations that made her uncomfortable.